So let's talk about you. I'm excited to talk about you. So you are, you mentioned to me in your email that it's been decades since anyone has ever run as a communist. So when was the actual last time? Do you know? Like
I think it was 96. There've been a
96.
few, yeah, there've been a few people who've been with the Communist Party USA who've run in in their states and had communists on the ballot. But the last big national one was in 1984. I know they made a joke of that in the press. 1984. I'm like,
Hmm.
guys, get over it. It was Gus Hall and Angela Davis. And that was the last time that they were on the ballot as president and vice president for the Communist Party USA. So it's the first time since 1984 here in Vermont that a communist has been on the ballot as a communist.
So when you say you're a communist, because again, all of these terms have been reassociated, they get redefined daily to the point where you don't even know what exactly they mean anymore. But they're still important to an extent because it's something to it's a catalyst. It's something that it's a jumping off point. So they're still important. So when you say you're a communist, what does that mean to you?
So ideologically, I'm a Marxist-Leninist, which means
Mm-hmm.
that I'm firmly placed within the Marxist tradition. And then the development of that, which came with Vladimir Lenin and the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917, that continuation that then created the Third International and the International Communist Movement. So that's where I find myself. So I defend the historical legacy of the USSR, even with all of the things that happened that I disagree with over there, and the bad things that happen. I defend many of the other socialist states that continue to exist to this day, like Cuba, Vietnam, Laos, China, the DPRK. I've been a Marxist-Leninist. I grew up that way. I moved into anarchism and Maoism for a period of time, but I've returned back to a strong Marxist-Leninist position. So I'm back where I started, really.
So I admittedly don't know all of the details here. I mean, I've read the Communist Manifesto and I've read a couple volumes of Capital, Das Kapital. But I'm not. I mean, when you get into Maoism and stuff like that, I'm a little foggier. I'm not a connoisseur. I'm not totally hip to it. So a lot of those details I'm not aware of. So I'm learning. In our conversation, I'm learning. So that's not like this. That's not the school of thought that's like against sex, is it?
I mean, that's against sex? No. There
Okay.
have been like extreme variations of everything, of course.
No. I understand that. That's why.
Yeah.
That's why I'm telling you I'm not familiar, so I'm learning. So if any of my questions are kind of elementary, I apologize in advance.
But... No problem. There have been, for example, that might come from, for example, there have been guerrilla movements that have barred their guerrillas from engaging in sexual intercourse or sexual relations to strengthen their guerrilla armies and things like that have been with both men and women. So that's been a historical thing that has happened. Or like in some really strong cadre parties, they've sort of pushed that historically. But no, of course, there's no sex position from me or from our party.
You're for it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right, cool. Yeah. So when you say you defend, the USSR and stuff like that, are you basically saying I defend the principles while still recognizing historical mistakes in the execution?
Sure, of course, absolutely.
Okay.
And also, as with everything, we can look at the historical mistakes, and I think that the record has been, it's the CIA has gotten in there, our, media.
Well, domestically, absolutely.
So
very much so domestically.
A lot of things that we sort of think about when we think of the Soviet Union, like all these massive concentration camps, the Gulag system, and all these millions killed and things. Well, actually, when historians go to the archives and check the numbers, they're like, well, how did you come up with a number like that? And they realize, oh, well, we looked at population trends and this, and it's like, well, you can't really look at that and then say all these people died if it's a population trend. It's like there's a lot of mistakes that have happened. There's a lot of, just overall number, grossly overestimating the numbers of people who died or who, were in camps, the numbers were actually far smaller than we think. We might, in our minds, people in the US are like, 100 million died from communism. And you're like, where'd you get that number from? Who's your source? Just like now with the Uyghur thing, I've been to Xinjiang, of course, in China, where the Uyghurs are. And I've been to the major cities, Urumqi, and, a couple other cities in the region. And when I went there, I didn't see any camps. I went to mosques. People were praying. I didn't see anything. And then you realize who's pushing this, theory. Adrian Zenz and all these kind of like crazy, victims of communism foundation, neocon, right-wingers, evangelicals. And you're like, obviously they're going to push this line of thought. So of course, I come from a tradition. My family were communists in Greece in the 1920s and 30s. My grandfather and his brothers fought in World War II and the Greek Civil War. So of course, we can say that Comrade Stalin made mistakes, but at the end of the day, the Soviet Union won World War II. The Soviet Union literally defeated fascism. Today, we might think in this country that, oh yeah, D-Day and Eisenhower and Patton and no. The USSR was fighting 200 divisions of the Nazi Wehrmacht, while the US and the UK combined were fighting 10. 200. Like almost 80% of all casualties in World War II were on the Eastern Front. So we can look and say, yes, of course, Comrade Lenin made mistakes, Comrade Stalin, Khrushchev, all these people made mistakes. But the legacy of the Soviet Union, the legacy of the first worker state, of the ability to provide for the people, to literally raise a people from serfdom into being the first country to put a man and woman into space in the span of 50 years, really. I mean, that's a huge legacy that has to be defended. Healthcare, education, gender equality, huge transformations of the society. That was all done because of not only of the leaders, forget about the leaders, it was also from the people themselves, from the Soviet people themselves, from the Chinese people themselves. And so I think that this this legacy has to be, spoken about. It has to be understood. And we should also talk about the bad things that happen. I'm not saying we shouldn't. We should, of course. But we should look and say, what did they do right? What did they get right? What were the amazing things that this project had? And what were the failures, and how can we learn from these failures so we don't repeat them?
Well, in bringing it to the contemporary United States, whether it be communism, socialism, anarchism, we are taught, the collective we in the contemporary United States, we're taught to only focus on the flaws of all of those systems. But with capitalism, we're supposed to ignore the flaws. The biggest and only flaw being it will always be destructive and eat itself. Always. 100% of the time. I mean, with other, with other types of systems, there's wiggle room. And there's ways, where you can kind of put some things in place to kind of prevent authoritarianism from happening. With capitalism, you can't. It's just always going to happen. It's when you have the most powerful people dictate everything. When you have the accumulation of capital, the word freaking capital's in it, and that is your only priority, and that's above all else, the same thing's going to happen 100% of the time. But getting back to communism, so the common argument that you'll hear, and I'm sure you've heard it a million times, is, well, I read something like the Communist Manifesto, I read these principles all sound great, but how do you prevent authoritarianism from happening? What's your answer to that question?
Of course, in a Marxist-Leninist state, you have democratic centralism, which means that it's actually even, I would say, more democratic. Each neighborhood is organized. I've been to Cuba, and I've been 3 times. I spent months there, and you have each neighborhood, each building has a CDR, a Committee for the Defense of the Revolution. So you have all these organizations, these mass organizations, and they all are part of the democratic process. So they all slowly, everything that people need. If I need something fixed, if I have a need for something in the community, I bring it up, and slowly it goes up the chain to sort of the National Assembly, to all the central committees, and then it comes back down, and all those things are taken care of. So you look at that and you say, okay, well, what's our system like? Our system is I vote occasionally, and the people empowered do whatever the fuck they want, and they're not accountable to anyone. And all right, well, I didn't have as much money as the lobbyists. One of the biggest things to prevent authoritarianism is to have an extremely educated population that's actively engaged in the political process. That's not what we have here. We don't have that here. They don't want that here. They don't want that here. I'm all in favor. Everybody, why not? Free education, everybody should have a PhD. Why not? If you're a janitor, you should be able to know philosophy too. Because ultimately, you're a janitor that lives in a society with me, you, and everybody else. So I would like to reason with you. You know, you're sitting there in your work and you're thinking, okay, how could this be made? How could this be better? Everybody knows in this society that they're getting fucked in this economic system. Everybody knows it. They don't know how to express it in theoretical terms necessarily, but they say, yeah, the boss is screwing me. I don't have enough money. I can't pay the bills. Okay, we put terms to that. And we say, okay, it's part of this structure. It's part of this system. In educating those people in a socialist society, well, yeah, you'll be part of a whole organization and a structure where you can have control over your own, labor power. And then you can be actively engaged in the political process. I'm not saying that, everybody's going to do politics 24/7. But if you have an educated population, people who care about their neighbors, about their comrades, about the people who live down the street, and about their entire communities at large, well, then, yeah, you can have a much better society. And you will prevent authoritarianism anyway. When they say, for example, Nicolas Maduro is an authoritarian leader, and I went to Venezuela and I went on the ground in 2019, the spring, and I said, I don't really feel that this is any. I feel that the U.S. is more authoritarian. There were police everywhere with machine guns and cruisers with the lights on and the surveillance state. No.
Are you familiar with Max Blumenthal and the Gray Zone?
Of course.
It was so when everything was going on, they just went there and they're like, so here we are. People are just buying food. And by the way, there's more than one brand of cereal. That's more U.S. propaganda. They're like, oh, if we have socialism, you'll only have one type of cereal.
No, it's so true. It's so true. And when I went to China and I was living there for 2 years, I never felt that I was living in an extremely authoritarian state. I thought, here's more authoritarian. Here, China, they open the door to me. They let me go to places. They let me see things. Of course, there are police. Protect. There's also over 1 billion people. So you got to make sure, people are going on trains every day, buses, things like that. But nobody was armed. I didn't see anybody with weapons, like that. Only in some places around, important government facilities, just like everywhere else in the world. But your common everyday police officer, no, just a radio, the uniform, and that was it. They were, traffic or if people needed help. Here, oh my God, I've been, the FBI has come after me. I was in the DHS leaked document that I have some links with Antifa and, with Brace Belden, TrueAnon. We fought in Syria against ISIS. We come back to this country. Now we're treated as terrorists. So they have links to Antifa. Link them up with foreign powers. It's craziness. This is the real authoritarian state. Capitalist authoritarianism,
So, Chris, I have a kind of weird request. If you could try to not turn your head, because you have a beautiful beard. Whenever you turn your head, your audio gets faint.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Whenever you, so it might be the placement of your mic, but whenever you turn your head, your audio cuts out for a little bit. So if you can do your best to just straight up.
I get too excited.
No, it's good. It's good. But yeah, I just wanted to let you know what's happening. Well, so what would you say, getting back to principles here, what would you say, why are you a communist and not a socialist? What's the differential there from your perspective?
There's lots of differences overall.
Sure.
First of all, there's multiple schools of communist thought, as you were saying. There's, Marxist-Leninism, there's Maoism, and then there's all different Hoxhaism. There's all different theories within there, depending on which theoretical school you follow. And then within socialism, you have a whole wide array of theories. The thing that differentiates socialism and communism in the main sense is that communism, especially Marxism-Leninism as sort of understood, really that term comes around after Lenin's death with Stalin. But before that, Lenin was basically saying we need a vanguard party, right? We need the most advanced workers, academics, farmers, at that time peasants. Everybody needs to be in this party, and we need to seize state power. And once we see state power, we have a good, collection of people here, and we can bring in all other mass organizations, and then we can redistribute, we can seize the means of production, we can really then build socialism from there. Socialism, different schools of socialist thought, but socialism, especially as understood by Bernstein and others, is really, okay, let's use the bourgeois parliamentary system. Let's try to run candidates. Let's try to win, and then we'll legislate our way to socialism. Marxism-Leninism says you can't legislate your way to socialism. What you have to do is you have to seize the means of production. You have to seize state power, right? Which is why sometimes Marxism-Leninism is looked at as something very scary, because everybody thinks that we're going to pull out, AKs and go out there and start, trying to seize everything. That's not necessarily how it happens. And in some situations, it has been rather peaceful without many bullets fired, depending on where you were, which time period, and how the general population was immiserated by the system that preceded it, right? So,
well, how would you foresee it happening here, like where you're at in Vermont? Like what would you foresee happening?
It's a big question. I don't have a crystal ball. I wish I did, or a Palantir, in Lord of the Rings. I'm not sure. The reason why, for example, I'm running is to change the narrative, change the conversation, and to sort of not only demystify, but to push back against all the red baiting and McCarthyism that has gone on in this country since since really the 20s, 30s, and especially after World War II, in the Cold War, right? So what I'm trying to do is say communism isn't the big boogeyman, right? Socialism, communism, all these things are not, they're not antithetical to what it means to be an American, right? Most people don't know that the International Working Men's Association, of which Karl Marx was a member, wrote a letter to Abraham Lincoln, and Lincoln had his diplomat in London respond to them, because they said, "Oh, we hope you win the Civil War, and we hope you continue the American Revolution to then be a workers' revolution." And Abraham Lincoln was very thankful for them putting him so high. If you tell a Republican today that Karl Marx and the other communists wrote a letter to Abraham Lincoln, they might have a mind melt.
Well, when you tell people that communists had their own newspapers in the United States prior to the 20th century, people's brains melt.
Absolutely. Or that
wasn't just, and it was
all these votes.
Right. Well, yeah, because socialists had their own newspapers, communists, federalists, and they all talked to each other and exchanged ideas. Imagine that. And the other thing, and Communist Party USA was, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is my understanding of it, but Communist Party USA played an instrumental role in us getting the New Deal. Because, FDR, people make it out like FDR was this big radical on his own. He really wasn't. He was more of a centrist, but he had the foresight to be like, well, here's what's going to happen. Those people out there, they're really pissed off. So, rich friends, you're going to have to give up a little or everything, your pick. And that's kind of why we got a New Deal. And the Communist Party, they weren't the only organization involved by any means, but they were one of the organizations involved. So what you saw happen after that was you saw a very concentrated effort to decimate all those movements, to decimate the workers' unions, to decimate Communist Party USA, to decimate the socialists. And a lot of it was done via McCarthyism.
Absolutely. And, most people don't even realize, everybody's saying, oh, Kamala Harris, woo, first black woman on a major party ticket. Why? Because on the minor party tickets, they've been there. The Communist Party put a black man as vice president in the 1930s. William Z. Foster for president, James Ford, vice president, black in the 1930s. I mean, can you imagine that? And the Communist Party had a poster with both of their pictures, and then in a map of the USA, and it's on my website, and it says self-determination for the black belt. I mean, 1930s, we're living in 2020, and everybody thinks this is like all new stuff. No, this is things that we've been fighting for. This is generations now of struggle, right? And then, of course, black women, huge in the communist movement. Black women who were involved with not only the Communist Party, but the Progressive Party, when Henry Wallace was involved in the 40s and then early 50s. I mean, the vice presidential candidate was a woman. And of course, you look at this and you say, wow, where have we come from? Where have things come along? Because most people today don't know any of this history at all. They don't realize that, exactly as you're saying, the United States had armed takeovers of entire cities by unions, by communists, and you look at this, you say, wait, what? Yeah, it happened. And that's why FDR, the whole ruling class, were shitting themselves and saying, oh my God, we're about to become Soviet America. What do? Labor peace. We purchase it. So we purchase off most of the working class. We give them a little bit of a house and a nice cul-de-sac and a car and some different kind of products. And yeah, we tax a little bit more so they can have better educational institutions and infrastructure. And then they won't get so radical. And that happened. That's how they bought it off. But now, of course, slowly, since the neoliberal turn, we're talking 60s and 70s. Yeah, of course. And then especially under Reagan, all that stuff was sold off, package all those good union jobs, ship them off somewhere else. And then the corporations are getting rich again. And then everybody's wondering why we're back in a phase when everybody thinks, yeah, socialism, it sounds like a good alternative. Yeah, because the Keynesianism of the 30s, 40s, and 50s, sort of the New Deal and then the Marshall Plan in Europe, which is why all the Scandinavian countries look like they do, why Germany looks like it does, is because we rebuilt them. We rebuilt them in our own image, but we quickly lost that image. They retained some of it. But we quickly were like, yeah, no, we're done with this. Wall Street, come on over. And so when you tell people like this, when you have conversations with people, people say, yeah, I heard something about my granddad saying this, or my grandmom was involved, or, and then of course, people begin to say there's a different narrative and they're not telling us. And why aren't they telling us? Why aren't they sharing this history? Because it's a part of our history. It's a huge part of U.S. history.
Well, and that's, I got to have lunch with Howard Zinn's son.
Mm-hmm.
And, I didn't want to make the entire conversation about his dad, but obviously I had some questions and he knew I did. And he was gracious enough to field some of them. And I said, where was the biggest butting of heads for your father throughout his career? What was like the biggest, issue that he had? And he said the biggest thing for my dad, and this was the case from the beginning until the day he died, was that there was this struggle, even in the academic world, on what exactly history is. And my dad entertains the idea that everybody tells the story of history, not just the powerful. And some of his colleagues, too many of them apparently, thought, well, the powerful get to tell the history. And that's not the way it should be. And that's why books like The People's History of the United States are so essential and important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you could tell a working class history from below, right? Because ultimately all the buildings, all the roads, all the infrastructure is built by working class women and men, not by the ruling class. I always joke with farmers around here. I say, do you think Donald Trump could pitch a bale of hay and milk a cow at 4 a.m.? I mean, come on. The ruling class has nothing in common.
I'd milk a cow. It'd be the best milk. It'd be the best milk you've ever tasted. I know all the best cows.
It's crazy. I mean, you really think about this stuff, and people, sometimes you just have to have a conversation with them, not fighting, not being aggressive, but simply saying, do these people have your best interests in mind? And eventually, and I talk to Trump supporters all the time. I mean, there's a lot of Trump supporters in my town, and you talk to them, and people have messaged me and said they're going to vote for me. Why? Because I'm talking about real stuff. I said, well, yeah. I said, I'm not a billionaire. I'm not a millionaire. I'm a farmer. I'm out there in the mornings with the goats and the sheep and everything. I take care of the chickens, we just harvested all the corn and everything that we had. I said, I'm all like you. I don't have a fancy car or anything. I don't understand. Like, who do you want to represent you? Who do you think has your best interests in mind? I said, it's people who live like you, who suffer like you, who have debt like you. Like, we are all saddled with debt, not only mortgages, student loans, everybody's suffering these days. And so I said, think about this. All those kids, they'd never go fight in a war. A lot of the rural kids here have fought. National Guard, they went off to war and they fought. I said, Trump's kids haven't gone out. Trump himself didn't go. He's so big bad against socialism and communism. When he had his chance to go kill, the Vietnamese who were fighting for their self-determination under the leadership of Ho Chi Minh and the Vietnamese Communist Party. Donald Trump could have gone there and tried to shoot some communists. He didn't. He didn't. But the communists in Vietnam gave the U.S. a shellacking and sent them packing, you know? So I always tell them, I said, you know, who has your best interests in mind? Who's really fighting for you? And who are you fighting for when they send you off to all these wars? Who's getting rich off of these things? And are you enjoying any of that? Any of the fruits of all that blood, sweat, tears, everything you give to some supposed beautiful country? I'm going to fight for democracy and freedom. I said, you're not fighting for that. You're fighting, you know, you're fighting for the oil companies. You're fighting for the big banks. You're fighting for all the industry. That's what you're doing, you know? And of course, you talk to people like this, they're like, yeah, you know, Smedley Butler said it, you know, a century ago, over a century ago.
And he wrote the book. He laid it out. He's like, here's the people who are getting rich, and that's all this is about. This isn't about democracy. This is about a couple people are getting really rich off of this system. And if we don't stop it, it's going to get even worse and worse and worse. And then it did. We have an entire economy built on war now.
We do.
Which is not only morally disgusting on every level, it's also completely unsustainable.
Of course. Of course. How many more countries are we going to pillage? And when are we going to have to start using nuclear weapons to get our things, you know, and our whatever the ruling class wants accomplished? It's very scary. I'm telling you, I talked to everybody. I said, listen, you know, we might have a lot of issues. You know, people are talking about civil war in this country. I said, I'm worried about something else. Nuclear weapons. Think about all the countries that have nuclear weapons out there, and think about all the ruling class interests that are competing and all the contradictions. Somebody could do something stupid. You know, it just came out that Trump wanted to assassinate Bashar al-Assad. I said, okay, you don't have to agree with Assad. Assad is the leader of Syria now. Yeah, he is fighting against all the jihadist forces that have been supported by US, Israel, Saudis, UAE, all this stuff. I said, yeah, but we can't just go assassinate people.
Yeah, we can't just assassinate people around the world.
Coups and regime change. How many countries do we have to do before somebody smacks us over the head? I said the bully is there. It never ends well. It never does.
Yeah.
I don't understand. No and I have no clue when I'm debating, you know, we just had a forum with the sitting Democrat, you know, Peter Welch, and I said, how much more money do we have to spend and how many more wars do we have to lose before we realize that the empire is unsustainable and that all this treasure could be spent supporting people here and helping to build other countries out there?
What was the response to that?
Well, how did your opponents respond? Of course, who's going to say anything? You know, I think I was the only one who ever served in uniform. So, of course, you know, everybody's like,
did you mention that?
Yeah, of course. I mentioned that earlier on.
Man.
My background. They said, what qualifies you? I said, well, I've seen war firsthand. I wore the uniform of this country, you know, and I said, you see all the horrible things that go on behind the scenes, you know.
I can only imagine. When did you serve? Like, what was the time period?
So I commissioned. I was an ROTC, in Army ROTC, and I commissioned as an officer. Graduated airborne school. You know, did all my training, and then eventually I resigned my commission as a conscientious objector. I said, I'm out of here.
Wow.
And then after that, I ended up volunteering to go fight in Syria against ISIS with the Kurds, with the YPG. And it was there where I saw on the battlefield, firsthand the barbarism of the U.S. assault on Raqqa. And I thought to myself, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. Like I want nothing. I came here, you know, I have Kurdish, you know, ancestry, Kurdish background. I said I came here to help with the struggle against the jihadists and things, but I don't want to be on the same side as the U.S. and NATO as they completely decimate a city just to show their might and to try out new weapons and use illegal weapons like white phosphorus. I saw white phosphorus being used on Raqqa, and we looked at other comrades. I said, we protest this stuff when Israel uses it against the Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank. Now we're sitting here on the side with the Americans using it. I'm out of here, you know. And eventually, you know, I packed up and left. And you just see, when you see these kind of things, you say, well, what are we spending all this money? Why are people dying? What's going on here? And of course, nobody can say anything, and nobody does say anything because they're all, I said at the end, I said, they're all beholden. All the other candidates are beholden to the military industrial complex, to all the corporations and the big lobbyists and the big interests that run this country. They're not interested in the working class people, because if you were, you wouldn't send people to go out there and die. For what? Nobody's going to invade us. Who's invading us? We have two oceans and we're bordered by Canada and Mexico. It's going to be, people have this kind of idea like Red Dawn scenario. I said, there's nothing like that's going to happen right now. I
No,
cannot
it's
fathom how you think that.
It's paranoia at just an obscene level, and so many people. Oh yeah, ISIS is coming to your kid's school. They're gonna be they're gonna be at the front doorstep by lunchtime. You want your kids to have recess? We gotta set the world on fire. That's what we have to do to prevent that. It's like, what planet are you on? You know what you should be worried about? The planet itself. Because you want to talk about a real conflict we have a conflict against climate catastrophe.
Absolutely.
That's the conflict we have.
Absolutely. And to address that, we got to end the war machine. End the war machine. Think about how much fuel is wasted on all these jets and aircraft and all the tanks and all the equipment moving back and forth and training. And why? Okay, everybody shut off the engines, land everything, and let's start cutting back on all this stuff. But they don't want to do it. They don't have a lot of money involved, trillions of dollars. Nobody's going to stop that machine unless the people rise up and seize power. Other than that, these people are going to keep doing what they're doing. More people are going to keep going out and dying for all these wars of empire and plunder and all natural resources. We want it all, screw everybody else. And this is just going to be.
So where can people learn more about you?
So I have a website, www.christopherhelali.com. And I have you can follow me on Twitter at Chris Helali. And really, my biggest thing, I know it's a cliche now, it's not me, it's us, sort of thing from Bernie's camp. But for me, like people have said, why run now? And I said, it's really important to change the conversation. So I encourage everyone, get out there. It doesn't take a lot. Get out there and just start having conversations. And I really encourage people to get out and speak to working class people. Get out and speak to working class farmers. Don't worry. I think that the left sometimes is stuck in a bubble and everybody kind of wants to be on their own. But it's really important to get out there, to talk with people and to have conversations and to not get triggered about everything. People are going to say a lot of shitty things. People say that I have Middle Eastern heritage. My dad's Muslim. They say all sorts of Islamophobic things. Okay, it takes time for people to learn. You slowly break down those walls and barriers. So, okay, well, that's not actually the right thing. It's that my dad's a good man, this, that. And you slowly, people say, oh, okay, maybe they're not all bad, or maybe these aren't bad people at all. Maybe I'm the one who's being, propagandized and somebody's trying to brainwash me. So I think it's really important that people speak to working class people, that people, take the time to engage with the people who are going to transform this country. Because ultimately, that's who we have to be talking to, not the elites who graduate from Ivy League schools who debate each other on the smallest minutia of theory. I mean, I don't fucking care. Working class people don't have time to read all the theory, but talk to them about the real issues, and I guarantee you'll get an audience.
All right. Well, ChristopherHelali.com. Everybody check it out. Awesome talking to you, man. This was a really fun conversation.
A pleasure.
And thanks for going through the news with me.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and